You were born in 1932 in Staneshti, a Romanian village in the Carpathian Mountains area.
The village was a lumber mill area, which your father managed. He was away in the forest from Sunday to Friday.
You spent time with your mother.
Aunts?
Tante Chaya and Tante Frida.
Your grandmother on her farm.
And your uncle with whom you had a special bond.
He would carry you around on his back and teach you things. Once, he woke you in the middle of the night to
see a baby calf being born.
You spent your time with adults since you were the only small child in town.
They always dressed me like a little doll.
You didn't have other children your age to play with.
You lived in a very segregated area.
Your father didn't want you attending school. You had a tutor and were only permitted to learn German due to your father's desire to be Austrian.
The Jewish people lived on one side of the village river, while the Gentile people lived on the other.
And the two should not meet or be friends.
There was a little Ukrainian girl that lived across the river.
I wanted so much to play with her. I was so isolated.
When you were 5 years old, you nearly drowned in a well, but your uncle rescued you.
By pulling you up in a bucket.
That same year, the family home burned to the ground.
There was some warmth and there were many challenges. This was your life, but in one night, it was cut open.
But not gently, or slowly, or with warning. Cut forever. That's when it happened. I went into shock. I stepped into a fog.
1941. A neighbor told your father,
"You better go hide because they're after you and they're going to kill you."
He escaped.
The Ukrainian supporters of the Nazi system.
otherwise known as
Our neighbors, they forced us out of our houses and into the town hall.
They started to remove the men.
But not my uncle.
we hid him under a blanket to protect him.
At first, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know my father had been captured. The Ukrainian men wanted him dead in the most painful way possible. They tied him to a chair. He took the chair with his teeth, dragged it over to the window, and jumped out onto the ground. He tried to run. They caught him. They took off his clothes, tied him to a wagon, and dragged him through the streets.
They were killing all the men. They wanted them killed immediately.
He didn't know what happened to us. We didn't know what happened to him.
2 weeks later, they said to the surviving Jewish people from the village,
Take everything you can carry and leave. If you do not leave, you will be killed.
I wanted to take my dog, but I couldn't. I joined the others for what was called a
Convoy.
the death march.
This was a long convoy march. Each village sent out all their Jewish people.
Father, he was alive. It was unbelievable. They let him go. Maybe they thought he'd been punished enough. He managed to find us. My Tante Frida,
her husband had been murdered that day.
Ukrainian woman, came to the road feeling sorry for us.
They offered to buy the young children.
My father said no. My cousin stayed with us.
Days turned to weeks.
Through the dense forest. It's getting colder.
Through the rain.
No warm clothing.
From August to November.
We stayed inside haystacks to stay warm. My mother brought her jewelry. It was the only thing she could bring. My father bartered it for rides on wagons when possible. Every day, they would assess who was strong enough to continue.
Ukrainian men with rifles. If you were doing well,
They kept walking.
If you showed weakness, you were, Mother! I was frozen in fear, holding on to my mother with all my might. The soldier yelled at his horse. He was trying to get his horse to pick up his front foot and stomp on my mother. But the horse wouldn't do it. He got very angry and hit the horse. And my mother. But my mother's life was saved. My father's 2 brothers, 2 sisters, my mother's sister, the Jewish men from our village. They were all murdered. We knew our assailants, the Ukrainian men who did this horror, our neighbors, our community.
There was a deep mistrust that started in my life at that time. It was so hard to feel trust. It was so hard to feel anything.
And the march went on.
there was no end.
There was no end.
There was no end. Until finally, I saw houses and windows.
The convoy had a destination, Mogilev.
A ghetto. We were put upstairs in a 2-story house.
That is when I got typhoid fever for the first time.
No medication.
I don't remember what I ate or when I slept.
You're burning up.
I hallucinated a great deal.
A towel for her head.
I lost it. I really lost it. But I survived.
Sometimes I look at 9-year-olds and wonder how I lived through what I did at that age. It's so hard to imagine. How did we go through all this? How did we survive all this?
My father knew what was going to happen. We were going to be sent to camps as slaves. We were going to be separated.
We can't be separated.
Amazingly, my father made a deal with the landowner of a desolate melon farm to smuggle us out of Mogilev.
You were given a tiny room.
With a little window.
You slept on the bread oven.
My mother and father worked. I had a grandfather, though we never spoke. He was a completely withdrawn man, even before the war.
We were with you for a little while.
But I couldn't feel anything from anyone anymore, not even my little cousin.
Your father brought back food, potatoes, onions.
Dark bread, lard, no books, no radios, no friends, no nothing. On the back of photographs I brought from home, sometimes I drew. A nearby farm. Jewish workers lived there, but they had typhoid fever. There were dead people there too. I was told never to go there, but I did. Again, I got typhoid fever.
Outside of your room, there was a huge field. You walked around, but not very far.
When you returned, you would sit next to the window with whatever thoughts you had.
Grandfather died, but I felt nothing.
I was frozen emotionally. I was 11 years old by then. It was 3 long years of staring out a window.
One morning, I walked out onto the field. I saw dead bodies all around me, but by this point, I had seen a lot of dead bodies.
You walked amongst them and looked through their wallets.
But you put them back. You didn't keep a single one for yourself.
One day, you were looking out your window.
And saw soldiers riding on horseback.
Retreating.
A knock at the door. A soldier.
I was so terrified of soldiers, but he was Russian.
You're free now. We're going to take care of you.
It turned out he was also Jewish. We decided to go home. Despite the betrayal of our community, we wanted to be home.
We started the long journey back.
With nothing.
Back to Staneshti. Back home.
But my father didn't come with us for fear of being killed.
You and I went alone, but not to our house. A Ukrainian woman who knew us said,
You can stay here for one night, but you must leave immediately. They're still trying to kill you.
My father was right. We never saw our home again.
1945.
a surprise.
Mother was pregnant. Before the baby was born, I was still in a fog. But once it was, that was it. I had a feeling. When my baby brother was born, I had a feeling of joy.
Your father was so overjoyed to have a boy.
He was our gift from heaven. He became our everything. We all experienced the joy
Together.
And most importantly, I fell in love with him.
Come along.
I was allowed to ride on.
A horse and wagon.
I became a lover of Russia because they had liberated us. I wore a red scarf around my neck, patriotically.
Roosevelt died.
I remember thinking, who is this Roosevelt? And why are people talking about his death? I became curious. I started to see and feel things. My father said,
We're gonna smuggle ourselves into West Germany?
though I had gotten so used to this life, I was also accustomed to picking up and moving around. And this time, I had my baby brother.
You arrived in Bensheim, Germany.
A displaced persons camp outside of Frankfurt.
You had a room.
But to us, it felt like a penthouse.
You got food.
And clothes. Packages from the United States.
A pocketbook, and my first beautiful dress. My dream during the war was to have a pair of brown leather boots. And lo and behold, my father had a pair made. Soldiers from the United States. As I walked, they would look at me and smile. My aunt said,
You are pretty. You are so pretty.
Pretty? During the war, I didn't have a mirror, so I had no idea what I looked like. But I loved it.
You were 13 years old.
And there were so many people to meet. That's when I met Ida. We would sit and tell stories of the war. But that's when I learned that some of the others had been to
Auschwitz and other concentration camps.
She was my first friend. I thought I was in love with her.
We were so attached, the best of friends.
Boys liked me, but I took it in stride.
We had parties. We had concerts. You sang solo at an event.
I had a decent voice.
More than decent.
For me to stand up on a stage and sing, it said so much about how I was feeling. I was coming into myself and who I was. I was starting to thrive.
But Ida found a boyfriend. She started to only be with him. I was alone again. I was devastated.
But you started to go outside the camp to a Hebrew school and take English lessons.
You became a very strong Zionist.
You belonged to an organization called Hashomer Hatzair.
My heart was with Israel, but my father said,
We're not going to Israel.
I was determined to go on my own, but I wasn't old enough.
We're going to America.
Your father had cousins in the U.S. in the lumber industry.
You left the camp to take a ship from Bremerhaven, a German port.
The rest of your family was going to Israel.
But our ship was delayed by 1 month. I ran away, back to my aunt. I want to go to Israel with you.
You will find your way.
May of 1947.
With my father, my mother, my brother, and I We made our way to New York, the Bronx, and actually, I was okay with it. I wanted to see. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. And most importantly, I was feeling things again.
My husband and I have enjoyed a warm and lovely life together. We have 4 wonderful children, and we are very thankful for them, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. We teamed up to build a successful fur company where we worked hard and we enjoyed it for many years. After closing our business, I went to work at the Claims Conference for an amazing 9 years, where I was able to assist other Holocaust survivors, as I was the only Holocaust survivor who worked there at the time. My early life in our quiet village, little village in Romania, changed dramatically once the Holocaust began. These were terrible years of uncertainty, fear, and loneliness, and my parents' main purpose was to keep me alive. Of course, they loved me, but were too busy working from dawn until night and trying to survive to express it. My message to you is that you should try to know and understand your feelings, how to feel love, and how to give love. These are very important goals that I wish for everybody, because I did not have them as a child during the Holocaust. I believe it was my daughter Carol, here with us today, and her recent book about my survival, which caused those long-forgotten memories of that terrible time to return, and which became instrumental in my participation in the Witness Theater program. Doing Witness Theater has also brought back many of the feelings that I had while I was a child during the Holocaust and had forgotten. For this, I am grateful. Thank you.
You were born April 12, 1941, in a town called Bobruisk in Belarus, Russia.
Near Minsk.
Your grandfather, a tailor, worked to support your entire family, including your great-grandparents and his aunt who was blind.
We, your grandparents, had 4 children. Your 2 sons,
Your aunt,
And me, your mother.
Your grandfather fought in the War of 1914, later known as World War I, and the Russian Revolution of 1917.
Before the revolution, Jewish families were not permitted to visit, let alone reside in major cities like Moscow or Leningrad.
your mother was very smart and graduated school early at age 16.
I loved reading. Chekhov, Pushkin, Tolstoy.
Due to the victory of the revolution, Jewish people in Russia were finally permitted to attend universities in major cities.
this was an important opportunity for the Jewish people. Higher education was now free for everyone.
I wanted to become a doctor. I had such a thirst for knowledge.
Her adventurous spirit and passion took her to Leningrad to pursue medical school.
For my mom to go from our little town of Bobruisk to Leningrad would be like today going to the moon. She was a pioneer.
Your father followed suit a year later, attending the Engineering Institute.
Your aunt did too. I also enrolled in medical school.
She finished 4 of her 5-year education before taking a hiatus.
Because I was born.
So much to be excited for.
April 12, 1941, 2 months and 10 days before the war began. I was an infant. My story was told to me by my mother and grandmother. Very few children survived from my town. It's a miracle I survived. Here's how it happened.
The radio in those days was played over a loudspeaker so the whole town could hear. Hitler has announced a war against us.
We are near the border. Among the first to find out.
The Nazis invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June. And they invaded Belarus immediately.
My family knew we would have to flee to survive.
We'll run to the forest to hide.
Your parents.
Your aunt? They're too old to run.
During the last war, they didn't harm the elders. They left them alone. They'll do the same this time.
They decided it would be safest to leave the elders behind.
I can't get her to stop crying. Something is wrong with her breathing. Everyone wants to leave her behind. What should we do?
We will take her. If she will die on the way.
That saved my life.
In 2 days, the entire city was engulfed in flames from the bombing.
We can't turn back?
The authorities stated you cannot return to your homes and must travel east.
My parents!
We have a horse and wagon with only a few days' worth of food and water.
I brought her photographs. Thank
Soon-
goodness I'd thought of them.
Soon,
Our horse has died. No food. We're gonna have to walk.
Mom had packed winter coats in the wagon. Thank goodness she thought of them. The bombing was just overhead. We were forced to move.
Go east. Go east.
From June 26th,
To wintertime that year.
Go east.
We were constantly told by the Russian authorities to keep moving.
Through East Belarus. To East Russia.
the thirst.
The hunger.
It was freezing. Absolutely freezing.
Even in her old age, my mother was terrified of feeling cold. She had been so traumatized by months of walking through that Russian winter.
A decree was made that said refugees are to be helped.
When we would come across small villages, the people took pity on us and gave us food and water.
The authorities provided trains for refugees to travel east.
Cattle cars.
The Germans have bombed the tracks.
They're trying to hit the cars.
Everyone would flee the train, scattering in fear.
Many were killed.
Walking.
Trains.
Bombing!
For months, this was the cycle. Sister, my aunt successfully escaped Leningrad. She found us. We met her in Voronezh, Russia, and continued on together.
East. Eventually you reached the city of Kazan, the capital and largest city of Tatarstan. It lies by the Volga River and extends east to the Ural Mountains.
We rented a room from a woman in her small home.
The horrifying stereotype of Jews at the time was that we had horns. Because we did not, no one knew we were actually Jewish.
Because of this, we were able to stay there securely during the war.
I took care of you throughout the war. Your grandpa.
Though I was no stranger to being a soldier, I was now over 50 and it didn't let me fight in the regular army. But I did help the front lines. I provided food, ammunition, and provisions. I also helped remove the wounded soldiers from battle. They would have a sanitation wagon on site, and I would carry those soldiers to the doctors and nurses and hope to save their lives.
Your father found a job working in an ammunition factory. He helped create weaponry and even airplanes for the war effort. Your mother.
Though I had not actually finished my medical degree, they were so desperate for medical professionals that they hired me as a surgeon's assistant. It's hard to believe, but our wages were very small. Practically non-existent, just enough to bring home soup to my mother and child. The hunger was horrible, and no one had food. People were desperate.
The hunger was so bad that people were resorting to cannibalism. Children were being kidnapped in the streets. Can you imagine to feel that desperate? It was a true horror.
My boys, your uncles, were only teenagers. It was such a hunger. They just couldn't take it. They joined the army in hopes to outrun the hunger.
They were both killed during the war.
My whole family tried everything they could to survive.
Sister, thank you for finding me a job.
Thank God your mom found your aunt a job on a military base. She was able to bring home food, bread, milk.
We didn't have to suffer so much from hunger anymore.
I was so very young, though I do have two distinct memories from that time. In the first, I was lost in the street of a big town. I was crying, and a man and woman came up to me and asked,
Why are you crying?
I've lost my mother. They took me to the police. In the second memory, my grandfather, who was in uniform, visited me at my kindergarten. He had just come from being on the front lines.
Olga?
I asked him, please, Grandpa, take me home, please. That's what I remember from the war. And then,
The war ended.
1945.
Let's go home.
It was my family's strong wish to return to their motherland.
The trek back.
This will not be easy.
This too, a little bit, I remember. A cattle car. It was crowded in the wagon. A lot of people. It became dirty without extra clothing, without everything. But we managed somehow. I was still very young. 4.5 years old.
Back to Belarus and your home of Babrus.
Mother? Father?
My grandmother so badly wanted to know what happened to her parents.
It was devastating news.
All the Jewish people from the town were sent to concentration camps.
But a Belarusian woman told us.
Not my parents.
My great-grandparents.
They were too old to move, so they killed them right there in their home.
All the Jewish people from the town that did not flee were murdered.
The entire town was in ruins. Nearly every home destroyed.
Miraculously, our house survived.
But it was occupied.
By a Russian man.
His wife?
And 3 children.
This man, it turns out, had collaborated with the Germans. My grandma turned to the authorities to fight for our house. Thanks to documents archived by the government, we were able to reclaim
Our home.
The man was prosecuted under the Soviets and given 10 years in prison.
Here, take this bread. Here, take this milk.
From that home, my grandma did whatever she could to help as many people as possible. She took in whoever needed a place to stay and gave whatever she could to others.
I again worked as a tailor, sewing to help out.
And we finished our education.
You stayed with me while your mother finished her dream of
Returning to medical school. I became a doctor.
And I began schooling of my own. First grade. Though many of the children from my town had died, we had one teacher for all grades. I still remember her and loved learning.
Heartbreakingly, your father passed away just after the war ended.
My mother remarried.
You had a brother.
We were so very poor at the time, though I didn't know it. I was too busy growing, playing, learning. To me, this was my life, and I was a happy child.
I was surrounded by a family that loved me very much. I went through a lot in the war, though I don't remember it with my memory. It's in my body. What remains is an imprint, like a fingerprint.
In 1951, you relocated to Minsk.
I grew.
You became a young woman.
Stalin ruled, restricting Jewish people. It was incredible poverty.
Though I was still able to get a very good education.
You were married. And you had a son.
He was my joy.
You continued to work hard.
My mom encouraged me to become a dentist because she said,
"Wherever you go, you will have your specialty in your hands."
I was to discover that she was right. Soon I divorced. My son was growing up.
The Soviets started a war with Afghanistan.
There were rumors the war would never end.
I was beginning to feel worried for my son and I. I felt like there was no hope. So I decided on my own to move to America. Just me and my son, just us.
You were so brave.
I don't quite know how I managed to leave my grandparents. I love them so much.
You were so strong.
But I thank God I did it. New York City, it was like a whole other world. 1980, I was 39 and my son was 13. This was our future in front of us.
Within 3 months,
You met your second husband.
He helped me to achieve so much. My husband encouraged me by stating,
If you were a dentist there, then you must be a dentist here.
it wasn't easy. Adapting to my new country, working, going to school, caring for my son, raising my home. But 5.5 years later, I was officially a dentist in the United States.
And you paved the way for the rest of your family.
10 years later, the rest of my family arrived to America.
Your mother, your uncles, your cousins, and much more family after that.
My grandparents died before they could leave Russia.
But your mother bravely made the trek at age 73.
And I, at age 96, am still living in Brooklyn to this day. Olga, we could have never done it without you.
you too were a pioneer.
After moving to America, I met my husband, who also became my best friend. Alongside my hard work, he helped me to achieve many of my goals here in America, including working as a dentist. After 10 years of waiting, my mother, brother, and the rest of the family came to New York to join us. My son graduated Yeshiva University and went to medical school to become a doctor. He got married, and now I have 4 beautiful grandchildren. This is my message to you. Work hard, be passionate about learning, be patient with the people you meet in your life, be respectful, particularly to the elders, because they went through a lot. Listen to them and obey them because they know a lot from their life experience. Ask them more questions, and most of all, I wish each one of you peace and ask that you do your part to keep the world in peace.
You were born in 1930 in Vienna, Austria, an only child and the youngest of 14 cousins.
You were your grandmother's favorite.
You called her
Oma.
She visited you by trolley every day.
You adored her.
Some evenings, your parents would go out ballroom dancing.
How elegant your mother was in her dresses.
You were very close to your father. He loved culture. He was creative.
And a rebel. He grew up observant and could quote any Bible passage, but was always questioning.
He brought that spirit into your life. He wanted you to learn to
Horseback ride, ice skate, play the piano.
Your mother always made sure you were...
polite, not interrupting people, behaving like a lady.
They were a good balance for me.
When you were 6, you got scarlet fever, but overall your life was charming.
Like a fairy tale.
My first 8 years were very important for me. They filled me with love, strength, and curiosity. The things that would help me
Endure.
You used to put a glass of water with a sugar cube
On your windowsill next to your bed.
for the stork to come, and it worked.
Your sister Ruthie came into the world.
The same year as the war.
Kristallnacht.
German soldiers!
Crashing, breaking,
Looting, beating.
Screaming in the streets!
We huddled by the radio. Schuschnigg, the Prime Minister of Austria, said, Gott wach über Österreich, which means,
God protect Austria.
Trucks line the streets collecting the men.
Hide in the attic.
The woman who did your laundry turned you in.
There's another Jew there.
the SS. He grabbed my father. I grabbed the arm of the SS man and I screamed, why? Why? Why do you have to take my father away? Then he gripped me by the neck and leered at me. A red face. Anger. Hatred. Like he was touching something unclean. He threw me against the wall. Why? He answered me,
Jüdisch Schwein.
which means a Jewish pig. I blacked out. When I came to, my father was gone. And so the nightmare began.
Your mother was at the Gestapo day after day to get more information.
Lines around the block.
Exhausting.
Degrading.
The stores wouldn't sell food to Jews.
Your Christian neighbors would leave food near your door.
They were so kind. The husband would play dominoes with me from time to time.
Again, the SS.
And newlyweds, obviously Nazi elite.
This lovely young couple just got married.
They need a dowry, which you will provide.
They took everything from our home. Except when they were about to take the mattress, the bride said,
No, I will not sleep on a mattress from these dirty Jews.
they left it behind. I was so grateful to have it. And my mother, and my sister, and dear, dear Oma.
Weeks went by.
And then, a postcard.
From father, a ray of hope.
Most of the words are blacked out, censored. He's in Dachau.
They ruled if you could prove you were going overseas,
You could be let out of the concentration camps.
But you had to leave Germany within 1 month.
he was alive. My mother went back to the Gestapo.
Her only hope was to get a ticket to Shanghai. Again, weeks went by.
And then, a telegram.
About my father. I knew from my mother's pale face.
They killed him.
Oma stroked her hair and said,
I will be with you as long as God will permit.
she was our pillar of strength.
Wait, this could be a mistake.
Look, the name is spelled wrong.
Mother left to verify.
It wasn't him.
Back to the Gestapo line, determined to get that ticket.
I don't know how she managed, but she got it.
9 months went by.
And then, he was at the door.
But he wasn't my father anymore. With the back of a rifle,
They split his skull.
He was rational.
but they gave us back a shadow of the man they robbed from us. He was never the same again.
You're leaving to Shanghai.
I'm not going to Shanghai alone. If I leave, they'll kill you. We'll hire smugglers to take us across the border to my family in Poland.
Oma?
We're going.
My dear Grandma,
We're crossing the border into Poland.
I visualize her lovely face. her warm blue eyes and sophisticated grace.
Everyone be quiet and hold hands.
I felt so secure when she was around. No evidence of my mischief could ever be found.
Thank God she's sleeping.
When lighting Sabbath candles, she was an inspiration. She prayed for the family and all the Jews to find salvation.
We've been intercepted. We have to go back.
At the time of prayer, she had a very serious face. The aura around her was like a heavenly maze.
Our second night, a different route, much more dangerous.
You didn't have to ask for a hug when needed. She knew your longing and always heeded.
We have to cross the river.
When the worst time of history came about, and she was separated from loved ones under the darkest cloud.
You take Esther, I'll take the baby.
I will stay behind, she said. I'm too old to run. I'll wait for my children until they return home.
Not a single splash, not a single noise.
My face was wet from the tears in her eyes. We hugged and kissed and said our goodbyes.
We made it. Now rest in this barn, and tomorrow to the railroad.
That was the last time I saw our precious star that helped shape my character and never left my heart.
Good night, Oma.
You traveled to Krakow, Poland, and saw children playing.
I was only 9 years old, but I had completely forgotten how to be a child.
Your father's cousins warmly welcomed you, and together you shared Shabbat.
The next day, a train to Oswado, Poland, where your life would be forever changed.
I met this part of my family for the first time, including Grandma Sarah, Aunt Sivia, and Cousin Chandel. And there, I met my grandfather, a godly-looking man with a warm smile and the bluest eyes I'd ever seen. Soon, I was to discover he would teach me so many important life lessons, including the importance of devotion to
family.
For 3 months, we lived life with hope.
Germany declared war with Poland.
The earth shook.
There's a nearby resort town in the forest, Zaklikau. No one will find us.
We walked. And hid. Until we arrived. In the morning,
I will prepare for the Sabbath by putting the cholent in the brick oven.
The planes are getting closer.
The walls are crumbling.
the building is collapsing! Run! The airplanes were so low we could see the pilots' faces! Run! In the chaos, we lost my family. My mother! The injured and dead all around. The town engulfed by fire. And then everything was silent. Ruthie asked for Mama, Mama. Father looked like a lost child. I knew I had to be strong for my family. Papa, let's go find Mama. We walked. In the distance, we saw...
Oh, thank God you're alive!
My father, the next day, with an uncle, found my mother.
I knew your father would find me, but if something had happened to you, it would not matter what happened to me.
Shockingly, the only thing that had survived was that brick oven and our children inside. We went back to Rozvadov, which the Germans had occupied.
The rabbi?
He had been wrapped in his tallit and burned to death in the center of town.
We must make it to the border. Germans.
With rifles.
They pushed us in a large crowd towards the San River.
If you didn't walk fast enough,
they pushed us into the river.
Some made it in boats.
Some swam.
Some drowned. I was dragged in the freezing cold water and pulled into a boat. I couldn't help but cry.
We made it.
But is this freedom? We continued our march to the Russian border for months on foot. A dangerous track. We were warned that Ukrainian and Polish people were hunting Jews.
young Ukrainian men.
They said to grandfather, "How come they let you live, Jew?"
We kept walking.
Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you. We'll finish the Germans' job.
They pointed the rifles at us. The children.
Grandfather begged, "Do not kill them. Kill me instead. Please."
His devotion to family. I started to cry. I will never see my Oma again.
You are so young and handsome. You do not want this on your conscience. Think of your mother. She would not want you to die.
They said separate. Turn around and lie on the ground.
In Yiddish, Grandpa said, when they shoot, pretend to be dead. He began to pray. And then, Mama, Mama, Ruthie cried out. I lifted my head, and so did everyone else. Perhaps what Grandma said had saved our lives. Perhaps it was Grandpa's prayers, or both.
In a few hours, we made it to Stanislavov, the border.
We rented a room across town.
They housed you in a Jewish school.
It was filled with refugees from all walks of life. Soon, my father became badly disabled from sleeping on the hard wooden benches.
Grandfather visited often to offer support. Once he
Brought me back with him to be with my cousins and other children. But they all spoke Polish and I felt left out. I began to walk, and night was falling. I got lost.
2 Polish ladies found you and took you to a house.
And who lived there but a Jewish doctor? He took me back to the school with him in a car. I felt like a celebrity. And what else? That doctor helped heal my father. Mother said,
It was God's hand that led you to the doctor's door that day.
Weeks passed.
the Russians want to register us as Soviet citizens.
But if we register, we can never go home. Soviet soldiers.
Again, with rifles.
They arrested us and loaded us into cattle cars.
Only hot water, kipiatok, and very little food. I stared out the window, looking at little villages, dreaming of a time when I would be free. We were on that car for 4 weeks.
Going north. But to where? Then a boat.
The worst conditions yet. We finally arrived in the deep forest of
Siberia.
a camp called Apkashevo. They said,
You will work to earn the respect of the Supreme Soviet.
I was assigned to a camp 10 miles away.
I worked in the forest cutting down trees.
A dangerous job. People were killed. Father struggled.
They did not consider him an advanced worker.
Grandfather helped others in the camp.
And Grandma tended to Mother. She was so sick. Ruthie was growing up. And quite happy. She didn't know any better. I felt so sad she didn't know a normal life.
The winters were endless.
Brutal. Frostbite.
My nose and cheeks would freeze. I rubbed them with snow to bring back circulation. I was so thankful Oma didn't have to experience these conditions.
Your mother was sent to a hospital.
20 kilometers away.
And all alone. I cannot make peace with that. Devotion to family.
Each day you walked that dangerous 20 kilometers to be by her side.
Bears in the forest. Interestingly, I gained a job as a black market racketeer, sneaking loaves of bread back and forth. But one day I came home and my grandparents were gone. Sent away. Father didn't make enough income to keep them with us. I no longer wanted to be alive. But I realized I was now the head of my family. The responsibility belonged to me. I was 10 years old.
Your mother's released from the hospital.
But nothing was fixed.
She had bone tuberculosis.
How do we do this alone? Without Grandma? Grandpa? Oma? Then one day,
Out of nowhere,
we were freed from the camp. But how free are we?
We were given a ticket to the Russian city of Tomsk. Arriving at the train station,
We had nothing but the gold and turquoise earrings Oma had given me as a baby. Here, sell these. He left, and we waited,
and waited.
and waited. Evening came, but something was terribly wrong.
I sold the earrings, but a pickpocket stole the money.
I saw the state of my family and ran out of that train station. I begged. I pleaded. Please, help us, please. But it was like we didn't exist. We were homeless for 3 months.
Then one day, a Jewish woman from Leningrad said, "I will help you, but you must do exactly what I tell you to."
Our heads were shaved.
Our clothes were disinfected.
I was sent to a hospital.
I was given a job.
We were taken to an orphanage, but when we got there, we were separated.
No.
Devotion to family. Every day, I visited my mother and my sister. They wouldn't let me see her, so I watched from afar. She looked so lonely.
Your mother got worse. 3 years in that hospital. They did an experimental surgery, but it only made things even worse.
In 1943, Mother died. At her funeral were only 3 people. My father, the man who drove the horse and carriage, and me. I was determined to get Ruthie back. I planned and worked to make it a possibility. I took my father to the orphanage, and there,
You were told Ruthie had been adopted by a couple, but the man had been killed in the war and she was returned to the orphanage.
she appeared numb, like Father had when he returned from Dachau. I could only pray she would heal.
A postcard from grandmother.
Grandfather had died, and grandmother 2 months later. My grief was inconceivable, but only strengthened my devotion to family, which I feel honored that they had taught me. Our life still not our own.
You were sent to a communal farming village called Ekaterinovka.
I cried leaving the grave of my mother behind.
Your father worked as a shoe designer. You learned to spin wool, knit, and farm for food. You lived in a little cottage with a floor of horse manure which you polished weekly.
And for relief, I wrote poetry on old propaganda newspapers in birch bark.
You made a dear friend.
Marussia. With her, I shared my poems, my heart, my pain. I trusted her.
Months passed.
Ruthie began to grow and adjust. And so did I. We became accustomed to this life.
1946. You had no way out of the Soviet Union until...
They're sending us back to Poland.
I left Marussia all my poems. We were returning home, though now only 3.
You arrived in a city called Yawor, abandoned by Germans, empty homes.
Like an alternative universe. To come back to Poland and try to start life as a normal human being? I was 16 years old. No direction, no education, only what I read. I swallowed books, the classics.
You belonged to a Zionist organization. Your father remarried.
It was like a mini Holocaust to our family. The woman was unwell and unkind. But I fell in love with the thought of Israel. So with my cousin, we left on a journey there, leaving my sister behind. We ended up in a DP camp in Germany, and I fell in love with a young man named Yosef. We became so close. We were supposed to be married. Though I received a postcard from my sister.
I'm so lonely, and our stepmother isn't kind to me.
On her deathbed, my mother told me to
Take care of Ruthie.
devotion to family. I made my way back to Poland, which wasn't easy because it was under communist rule. I accepted that I would never see Yosef again.
Life again took a turn.
You made close friends.
One of which became more than a friend.
Shlomo Gever. He fell deeply in love with you. On December 18th, 1948, you wed.
For the first time since I was 10, someone cared for and sheltered me. With him, I was ready to build a family.
Together you went to Israel. A journey with a story all of its own.
I became a mother.
You had 2 beautiful daughters.
And eventually built a life all together in the United States.
It was important for me to be a mother, to bring back a piece of what we had lost. My devotion to family.
After witnessing the gruesomeness and cruelty of the darkest time in human history, I didn't believe that I could recover, much less thrive. I left the displacement camp in Germany, resettling temporarily to Poland, where I met my husband. Eventually, our dream of reaching the state of Israel came true. It is where we created the loving home and family we longed for. We raised 2 lovely daughters that were the answer to my prayers. We have since been blessed with grandchildren and great-grandchildren that fill life with love, joy, and pride each day. The love of writing and crafts continues to enhance my life. My message to you: every survivor has a profound and different story, and every voice reminds us of millions of stories untold with deep and profound yearning to be heard. As written in my book, I asked why. Why were we treated so inhumanely? The answer never came and never will. It is way beyond civilized human comprehension. Yet the victory of my survival as a child was to stay whole, guarding your soul from the evil around. Remember who you are, as I was told by my dear grandfather. If you lose that, then they've won. I was brought up with much love and incredible role models. They were my strength and guiding spirits to my identity throughout my childhood and forever. I believe love, honesty, and respect should lead the way. I believe by serving each other, we are doing God's will.
You were born in 1930 in a town called Piatra Neamț in Moldova, Romania.
The atmosphere of your town was very special.
Surrounded by beautiful hills, everything was connected to nature. In the wintertime, skating and skiing.
In the summertime, going to the riverside to bathe and bask in the sun.
Ornate horse and carriages decorated the streets.
The town was affluent, with a large middle class.
The relationship between the Jewish people and the other religions was a good one.
A peaceful life, a friendship amongst the people.
All the town's children were together in the public school.
The building was pristine and the teachers were excellent. It was separate for boys and girls.
Your mother was very invested in your education. French lessons, English lessons.
And she maintained our wonderful home.
Crocheted tablecloths and curtains. Tending to the flower garden. She loved beautiful things.
And she kept our house happy and organized.
And she loved to sing.
Your father was very talented at business.
He started modestly, but managed to build a very successful company.
We admired him, as did the others in our town. In business, he was considered very clever.
You had a large extended family and would gather together for the holidays.
The adults would go to synagogue dressed nicely, and when they returned home,
We were waiting with a honey cake.
You had a sister who was 2 years older than you.
And we loved spending time with friends.
nearly every day would go to the park on the hill.
And life was like an adventure.
A woman had a small business,
selling pretzels and buttermilk.
It was such a treat for us. I felt very safe in our town.
So safe that when you were 5 and I was 7, we would walk to the movie theater by ourselves to see Shirley Temple or Mickey Mouse.
We felt very free. This is the memory I have of our childhood.
Mine too.
8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. It was at this time I became aware, slowly, of what was going on. 1940.
The adults were worried. News was bad.
Did you hear the prominent university professor Nikolai Yorga has been killed?
Did you hear the prime minister was murdered?
Did you hear the king has been forced to abdicate? He fled the country.
What are we gonna do?
They took my radio away.
Mine too. We can't trust the newspapers anymore.
What's gonna happen?
I could tell my parents were nervous and concerned, but I didn't feel a difference until... You've been expelled!
Our beautiful classrooms.
Became shabby ones.
Our teachers changed.
Most were now Jewish lawyers, no longer allowed to practice.
And the biggest change?
Boys and girls learned together. Despite the changes, our schooling was excellent.
The Jewish community pulled together.
Our teachers were so committed to providing us with the best education.
It was their national obligation to help, and they were very smart. As a child, I didn't understand the magnitude of what was going on.
But my parents were still very concerned.
At first, our non-Jewish friends were friendly.
They were shocked at what was happening to us.
But after a while, some of them started to avoid us.
Even my old friends from school. If we were walking on the same side of the street, they would cross to the other side as to avoid me.
The Legionnaire!
The Nazi party in Romania.
In 1940, they took away your father's business.
This can't be.
Money will be more important than things.
Your parents sold their possessions.
They heard rumors of what was happening in the border towns.
If we're taken away,
We can't take our furniture with us. We must be wise. We must prepare.
And then the soldiers.
The German army entered Romania.
And their presence scared us. Only their presence, because for us we knew what they could bring, but we didn't know how bad it would really be.
You were forced to wear the star.
This was new.
hoodlums joined the party.
They began attacking people in the streets.
And we weren't allowed to say anything.
Our rights had been taken away.
And the law was no longer on our side.
Our safe town?
Was now not safe at all. Our home!
It had been confiscated to accommodate German officers.
Our beautiful home. Our big home.
Was gone.
Many Jewish families had been evicted from their homes all at the same time.
We need to find a place to stay.
Renting options became expensive and hard to find because everyone was looking all at once.
We found a place. It has only one room.
But we are lucky. We have a place to sleep.
My parents kept a good attitude. They took this as something temporary.
We will get back our property.
You will get back your profession.
Everything we sacrificed,
We will get back.
This was the spirit. When you are a child, you take for granted what you learn from your parents.
Because what came next took all of our strength.
All Jewish men,
Report for duty.
immediately!
Our father was taken.
With most of the Jewish men, they were all sent to different places
Put in barracks.
and forced to do heavy labor.
And what was worse,
He can't write to us. We have no idea where he is.
This is the worst. To be separated. So scary.
not only scary, so sad.
We were very upset when he had to leave, but we thought he was going to work. We were living with the hope that this was going to be a short time.
Though we were not aware just how prepared the Germans actually were.
Inflation. Money is losing its value.
Less and less food. The prices are rising.
Drastically.
Our mother,
Got a job at a soup kitchen. We have to pay the rent.
And we were so grateful to get food for free.
Here's some bread.
and to get food at all.
The Jewish community banded together to provide for the soup kitchen and to maintain the school. Off you both go.
Our mother was still very concerned with our education.
So we went to school during the week.
But on the weekends, we helped to provide food to the people. Father, we didn't know if he would return. Mother, she had all the responsibility. The atmosphere we lived in was frightening. We didn't know if we would survive to the end of all of this.
But there will be an end.
We fought hard to survive, and we fought to not lose our morale even harder.
Though we didn't know just how close the Germans were to winning this war.
August 1944.
All of a sudden, we saw the German army
In perfect order.
Retreating.
At the age of only 22, King Michael formed a new government with members of all democratic parties.
Managing to get Romania out of an alliance with Germany, bringing peace to the country months before World War II ended.
preemptively saving thousands of lives.
And quite possibly, ours. And what's more, Father returns.
It was a miracle.
And things started getting better. When we found out what had happened in other countries, we felt we were lucky.
Even to this day, I get so upset by what happened.
Soon we were able to return to our home.
And no one opposed.
We tried rebuilding a normal life.
Your father sold his profession.
I'm ready to start something new.
It was a fantastic time for us. It was a fantastic time for everybody.
For 2 years, there was peace under a new democratic government.
Though under the surface, things began to change.
Communism. We didn't know. Nobody knew. We were so surprised. The Cold War. The Iron Curtain.
The rich fled the country.
Because soon, they closed the borders.
They took land from whoever owned it.
This time, it wasn't just the Jewish people. This impacted everyone.
There were two classes, the working class and the bourgeoisie.
We had no idea we would fall into the wrong class, the bourgeoisie.
The terror spread.
There were spies everywhere.
If you said the wrong thing,
You were put in jail.
We were forced to stand and cheer for Stalin, for they had a saying.
He who is not with us is against us.
You're afraid to talk.
people will report you to the police.
People are going to jail.
For nothing.
Years and years of terror. We were so restricted in all that we did.
But we didn't give up. You didn't give up.
I managed to finish university. I became a textile chemist. My sister got married, and so did I. My father wasn't allowed to work anymore, so together we worked to support our family. We started to rebuild.
I managed to leave for Brazil.
Your mother went with her.
Your father, sadly, passed away before he could make the trip.
1970.
My husband and I finally got permission to leave the country.
You waited in Italy for 6 months while you waited to enter the United States.
For the first time in our lives, we didn't have to work. We were free to experience, to explore, to enjoy. Then,
America!
My husband and I came to America and worked very hard to find our way. I, as a textile chemist, my husband practicing medicine, the war, communism, for years, suffering, for years, restricted. It was now. My husband and I decided to see the world.
Brazil, Chile, France,
Istanbul,
Spain,
Norway,
Canada,
Hong Kong, Australia,
Argentina,
Fiji,
Japan,
Bali,
New Zealand, India,
Sweden,
Venice,
Germany,
Austria,
Switzerland,
and so many more.
And see the world we did. Again, my life was like an adventure. The memories I keep with me in my mind and in my heart.
In the United States, I work as a textile chemist. As often as we could, my husband and I took the opportunity to travel the world. That was an investment we made in our life to learn about other cultures and people. In all of the places that we traveled, we found people to be very friendly. Many were interested in finding out how we were enjoying their country and were eager to help us with tourist information and suggestions about what to see. Very often, in only a short time, we became friends, openly sharing impressions and opinions. We thought about how beautiful it would be if this kind of spontaneous friendship would also happen between countries. We would share a better world. Now, when I look back, it is amazing what remains in my memories of our time spent together. My message to you: I had a very hard life as a young person and often felt afraid. It is important to choose a profession that you like and to be prepared to be independent, especially if you are a woman. Your life depends on the decision you make and your professional achievement when you are young. In Romania, I didn't have freedom to travel. Because traveling is now so much more accessible, I recommend to you to travel and to know the world. It gives you food for thoughts and enriches your life.
You were born May 10th, 1923 in Stuttgart, Germany.
A lovely town, rich in architecture and culture.
Your little brother was born 2 years later.
Your second cousin was Anne Frank.
Your mothers were first cousins. She was 6 years younger than you, and the first time you met was at your grandparents' home in Aachen, Germany, when Anne was 3 and you were 9.
She was a funny little one, always such a lively girl. We got along so well. She loved to write and always had ink stains on her fingers.
Your family was wealthy. Your beautiful home had a swimming pool, and you loved to swim.
Your father was the first in your community to own a car. He owned a company that manufactured steel for Mercedes-Benz. He was a quiet man.
Your mother was just the opposite. Talkative, charming, bubbly. People loved being around her, including you.
Your parents weren't overtly religious, though your grandfather was a rabbi. You went to his house for the Jewish holidays.
You attended a prestigious private school. Starting in kindergarten, every day you were driven to school by a chauffeur. When you got older, he sometimes let you drive. You had many friends.
At age 9, you contracted a lung disease and had to be sent up to a hospital in the mountains run by Catholic nuns. Upon returning home, you repeated a year of schooling.
At age 10, your family moved to the renowned Weissenhof estate, designed by some of the world's most notable architects.
We had such happy times there, the happiest of our lives.
But in 1936, your family had to move out because Jewish people were not allowed to reside there anymore.
Things were changing.
The money, the security, our life, it all started to fall to pieces.
Your housekeeper, whom you loved, would sometimes take you to the movies, but soon Jewish people weren't allowed in. I would sneak you in anyway. A different housekeeper asked your mother for money.
It's for my son. He's an SS officer and needs new uniforms.
Though she was generous,
I didn't give it, of course.
Age 13. You were tall for your age.
one evening you were at a nightclub with your mother and uncle in Munich. There was a table of Nazi officers in uniform. One got up from the table.
He's gonna ask you to dance. You are not to dance with him.
She was right, and you said,
No, thank you.
You were instructed to do the Heil Hitler salute in class. You had an argument with a teacher.
I won't do it. I shouldn't have to. He got very angry with me. When people would put their hands up, I would put mine down, like this. I had no choice.
Then one day, Hitler came to your school. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a brown suit.
I remember thinking, my father owns the same exact brown suit.
The next day, you were called into the principal's office.
Am I in trouble because I won't do the salute?
She told you you couldn't come back to school anymore. You asked,
Why not?
why?
Because you're a Jew.
I went back to class. It kills me even now to think I went back.
School children began to throw rocks at your brother.
We had to send him to boarding school in Switzerland for his safety.
It sinks into you when you are a child and you're feeling hatred against you.
November 9th. Kristallnacht.
they put all men into concentration camps.
Including my father.
Dachau.
I was a proud German. My father was wounded in World War I. How is this happening?
He was gone.
Father!
4 weeks later, he had returned.
He looked awful. He was spent. His head was shaved.
He had been released early because he had a steel business.
Which the Nazis needed.
We were lucky. I asked my father about Dachau. He told me only one story.
As punishment, we were forced to stand in November rain for 24 hours, naked.
My parents rarely talked about their emotions. I could tell he was heartbroken. This wasn't the Germany he was so very proud of. The SS had got what they wanted. They'd taken his business and thrown him out. It made him feel like nothing.
This is too dangerous. She must leave.
You were 15 years old. Your mother took you to a train station in Frankfurt.
You were told you were going to Amsterdam.
We had friends in Amsterdam. Perhaps I'll stay with them. Maybe I'll go to school. Honestly, I didn't know anything. I had no idea of the impact of what was about to happen.
You cried on the train.
What was ahead of me?
What was behind you?
Just days after your departure.
The Germans invaded.
I felt so very isolated on that train. Me and many, many others. I now know I was on the Kindertransport. I was leaving behind my childhood.
It changed my life and my mind forever.
Before you left home, your grandfather took you shopping and spent a fortune on fancy clothing.
From a store that was very famous and elegant.
The most beautiful clothing you can imagine. Though where I was going, I didn't need it. I was stepping into a life of shock and I couldn't turn back. But if I hadn't left, I probably wouldn't have made it.
Amsterdam, you were loaded onto trucks.
And we were taken to a facility where we were sprayed with disinfectant.
Like prisoners. We were children from good backgrounds. Nobody told us anything in any language.
You were taken to an orphanage near the ocean.
And the head warden was so cruel to us. We were served food in dirty containers infested with maggots.
Weeks quarantined in barracks.
Then to a more rural camp.
I was taken to several different facilities, carted here to there, here to there.
Then to the Berger Weiss House, an orphanage housing refugee children.
The conditions were terrible. I was young and terrified and didn't realize the horrifying nature of it all. We couldn't really live. We just existed.
Anne and her father Otto weren't in hiding yet, so they were able to visit you at the orphanage.
Anne would bring me peanuts so I would have something to eat. We weren't choosy in those days. It was such a treat.
Most of the children at the camp were younger than you.
At one of the camps, I took care of a little boy. Bernie was his name. His parents had left him at the railroad station. I took care of him. Later, he was reunited with his parents. But for the most part, I don't remember other people. Maybe one or two faces. We didn't learn, we didn't play, we didn't do anything. We were children away from our families. I have a good memory, but perhaps I don't want to remember that time.
We found you through telegram
We were released from the Germans.
and on our way to England
We came through Holland.
and the German-Dutch border.
We were able to see you for one day.
One single day. I was so very homesick. I'd been alone and away from my family for nearly 3 years.
We sent out letters
Letter after letter,
to nearly everyone we knew.
pleading for help to get away from the Germans.
My childhood friend from the town I grew up in agreed to sponsor us. Ironically, he was a priest. Through him, we got the visas that we needed to get to the States.
You and your brother were to meet us in London.
You stayed with Anne for a few days before joining us.
It was a modern apartment block on Merweldeplin Square. I remember the building. I don't remember much from those days, but I do remember when I looked back, Anne was smiling at me from that window. I was one of the last people in my family to ever see her.
1940.
Our family was reunited in London. We stayed there as we waited for our ship to the United States. Mommy! We have to get down into the air raid shelter.
But I couldn't move. I was so scared I turned to ice.
It's time to leave.
We boarded the RMS Samaria for the transatlantic crossing.
We were on the last ship out of Europe.
That saved our lives. I was 17 years old. New York. I didn't know what to think or feel. How could I? It was a strange new world.
We came with 2 suitcases.
And $10 in our pockets.
We paid for containers to be shipped to the U.S. with everything we owned.
But they never arrived. The German government confiscated them.
I had an accordion which I played in the orchestra. That was the one thing I took with me. A tall customs officer asked me to play. I couldn't tell if he wanted to make fun of me or if he needed it for a statement, but I wouldn't do it. I was too exhausted. My father had to return the next day and pay $5 to get it back, half of what we had.
You stayed with an aunt.
And after 4 days, you got a job.
As a maid for a Jewish couple in the Bronx.
You didn't speak any English and couldn't communicate with them.
You lived in their home, worked 6 days a week, and made $25 a month.
My family survived off my income, and that couple treated me so terribly, even though they knew where I had come from.
I was no longer a child or a young person.
Eventually, your father found a job working as a low-paid day laborer in New Jersey.
They found out my skill set and I applied for a bigger job.
He didn't get it, though. Not because he was a Jew, but because he was German.
Because I was German, I was seen as a security risk.
We muddled through and somehow managed life. When we came to this country, my mother said,
"We do not give up just because we have nothing left."
I think it was a good thing.
Many of the family members that you left behind were killed.
Including Anne.
But the years went by and we were able to build.
Anew.
You got married.
You had a daughter.
You had a son.
I still cry to this day when I think of all that happened. It's so sad to know that I may never get over it, but as Anne said in her own words, in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart.
My family found our way to America. My brother had become a famous scientist. I became a clothing model and a successful saleswoman, working with clients like Elizabeth Taylor and Lucille Ball. I met my husband, who had also survived by escaping to China, Shanghai. We had 2 beautiful children. I lost my son, who was 4 years old, and I think of him every day. I'm thankful for my daughter Nicole and granddaughter Sophie. My message to you, that such hatred turned the world upside down and killed millions of human beings. I will never understand it. It still shocks me to this day. My dream is to make it better for the next generation, like my granddaughter Sophie and everybody else's children. Yet as advanced as we are, I can only wonder, have we done enough? That's where all you young people come in. How will you as young people help to change the world?